Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If this is your first time, we appreciate your time. In this episode, we shall be diving deep into how Moscow is gradually chasing France out of the continent of Africa. We will analyze this from the geopolitical standpoint. We shall also look at events on the ground, and we will explore this like never before seen. So we encourage you to watch this video to the end for clarity and better understanding. So without any much delay, let's just dive straight into it. The French flag was lowered for the last time in the Bila Zagreb military camp in Burkina Faso a couple of months ago, marking the end of 13 years of a presence by French armed forces in the West African country. France's withdrawal from Burkina Faso comes at a time when you are less likely to see the French tricolor in the capital of Ouagadougou than the Russian red, white and blue, marking a rapid and stunning loss of influence for the former colonial power. Around 400 French troops had been posted in Burkina Faso since 2010 as part of France's effort to stop hostages taking and also later to curb the expansion of terrorist groups in the broader Sahel region. In January, the French were given 1 month to leave the country, a decision that followed a period of growing instability in the country, including 2 coups d'etat in 2020. The withdrawal from Burkina Faso is the third setback for French President Emmanuel Macron, who promised a new approach to Africa when he came to power in 2017, one based on a partnership of equals. Moving ahead, in recent months, France has also had to leave Mali and Central African Republic, raising fears of a domino effect across the continent as Macron winds down his country's decade-long bacchanal operations to fight against jihadists in the Sahel. It is a real test for France, according to one expert, Saidik Agba, a writer from Niger and an African security studies specialist at the University of Valenciennes in France. The expert warned, if France doesn't want to see a contagion across the continent of Africa, it has to change its approach. In Burkina Faso, he continued, the situation is shaky, Agba added, and also now in Chad and Niger, people wanted to see a new type of partnership with France. Based off his own analysis, there are still about 6,000 French boots on the ground on the African continent, including 1,000 in Niger and over 900 in the Ivory Coast, according to local reports based on our own research. The reasons for France's waning influence in the Sahel region are multifaceted, rooted in its colonial history and accelerated by the local politics. But its troubles are also in consequences of Russia's ambition to expand its footprint on the continent, especially since it started over its scale of invasion of the country of Ukraine. Looking forward, the Elysee Palace has taken note. If you consider when the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, traveled to Angola, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Republic of the Congo, Gabon, and also the hills of Russian Foreign Ministry's Federal Labour Store of Mali, Mauritania, and also Sudan in the January of last year, you could imagine how the tensions are warming up within the African continent. As French troops are systematically ushered out, they are in some cases being replaced by mercenaries from Russian paramilitary organizations, the Wagner Group.
What's your response? Of course, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, threatening that they better not attack.
Well, good morning, Amy, and thank you for having me. We oppose all military intervention. We should make that very clear. We oppose the military intervention in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Guinea. But one cannot oppose the military intervention without opposing France and the United States and their militarization of the region. This recent destruction of civilian power and civilian leadership in Niger is one of the 9 sequences that has developed since the war on terror in that region. The fabrication of terror, the intervention of the United States and France in the region, and the consequences of the destruction of Libya and the financing of groups, military groups in the region by France. Now this military intervention in Niger is a consequence of the militarization of Nigerian society when the society needs social and economic reconstruction. The United States has pumped more than $1 billion into this region, into military facilities and military programs, and supporting military elements in this region. In Niger alone, the United States has spent $500 million building a military base and military and drone facilities in Agadez to support French exploitation of the mineral human resources of Niger. So we cannot discuss what's going on in Niger without discussing the call by the African people for the expulsion of France from West Africa. The foreign minister of Mali has called on the United Nations to investigate France in the region. The former prime minister of Italy has called for sanctions against France. And it is the right-wing conservative forces in the United States that is supporting France, to the point where now we see the conservative wing of the Biden administration, led by Victoria Nuland and Antony Blinken, leading the discussions on Africa. Why is it that Victoria Nuland was in Niger on Monday and Victoria Nuland is in South Africa? The Biden administration has African expert. They named Johnny Carson as their expert on Africa at the last US-Africa summit. But it's Victoria Nuland, the hawk that wants to militarize the planet Earth, who is a rabid militarist, who is now flying between Nigeria, Niger, and South Africa, carrying out US policies. The task is for the left and progressive forces in this country to call for the removal of the United States Africa Command from Africa, the closing of the US military facilities in Niger, and to support the people of Niger in removing France from Niger, just as the people of Burkina Faso and Mali has done. And we should support the call for federation between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso.
Give us the history of Niger and French colonialism there. We'll also talk about the United States.
Well, Niger is one of those states that has suffered from French military intervention and destruction in the region. The French are inordinately dependent on the exploitation and plunder of Africa. The French has military personnel in Niger. When their military personnel were thrown out of Mali and Burkina Faso, they were redeployed to Niger, and they were stoned on the way to their bases in Niger. The France has exploited the mineral and natural resources of Niger. The French uranium mines in Niger not only exploited the uranium resources of Niger, but France has also closed mines and left radioactive material that is deleterious to the health and safety of the Nigerian people. Now, everyone in West Africa is calling for the ending of the CFA franc and the domination of the economies of West Africa by France. They're calling for the removal of the 240,000 French personnel in West Africa. In the case of Niger, France is opposed to any plans for the reconstruction of the country. Let's take the major plan in this region for the reconstruction of the country. That is the replenishing of Lake Chad. You started this news broadcast this morning by talking about a fire in Hawaii. Those kinds of fires are going on all across West Africa because of global warming. Global warming has accelerated the depletion of Lake Chad. Lake Chad has lost 95% of its water resources. There's a plan by the Lake Chad Basin Authority to replenish Lake Chad. Who is against this? France. Who is against investment in reconstruction in West Africa? France. who allegedly has been supporting terror groups in West Africa when the United States called for investigation into Boko Haram. It was revealed in the Nigerian newspapers that the French has been supporting Boko Haram in Nigeria. So the French create terrorist groups and then goes into African countries to say they are fighting terrorism in Africa. This kind of duplicity by France and fomenting terror and destruction has been challenged by the peoples of West Africa. In every country in West Africa, they're calling for the ending of French economic, financial, and military domination. So we in this country must call on our representatives and our political forces who are progressive. For example, Ocasio-Cortez, who is a progressive member of Congress. When she was a student, she went into Niger. Why are they not raising their voices against the militarism and militarization of West Africa by the United States military, and to call for investment in health, reconstruction, water supply, and the safety of the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali? The United States, France, is gung-ho about reversing a military coup in Niger. What about the military coup in Sudan that has been supported by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates? What about the destruction of the military in Sudan against the peoples of Sudan, calling for the restoration of democratic relations? We cannot be selective in our opposition to militarism. We must oppose militarism of all sorts in Africa, but the priority at this moment is for the removal of France and to call on the United Nations to have sanctions against France for its destruction and militarism in Africa.
Some French officials are beginning to acknowledge the complication, according to one French expert who said that they have not built enough power. French experts and diplomats understand and analysts understand the challenges on the ground. The continent of Africa is warming up regarding those two political competition, looking at their presence and also influence in the continent of Africa. In his defense review speech, Mr. Macron argued that the army should also focus on influence operation in the face of disinformation campaigns and attempt to manipulate civilians, particularly in the continent of Africa. French Armed Forces Minister Sébastien Lecornu visited Ivory Coast to look at the specific arrangement of things. He's been to this country 2 times just within a year, and also they have been to Senegal as well to look at the strategic activities happening on the ground. And in an effort to fight back in the virtual sphere of diplomacy, France's Foreign Affairs Minister has created a new unit to spot early signs of disinformation campaigns and provide French officials across the world with a back office to help respond to fake news operations, according to the French diplomat, with the knowledge regards to the operations in the region based on our research, ahead of France's military withdrawal from its 3 former colonies. Now let me say this, hitting a reset button amidst fear of a domino effect could be crucial. Russia's disinformation machine would not have been so effective in Africa had France's record on the continent been better in the past decades. Some French experts and lawmakers say former French colonies, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad retained links to France for a long time, but ranked as some of the poorest countries in the world, and even as French troops have fought jihadists in the Sahel since 2013, security in the region has significantly and steadily worsened. Russian propaganda takes advantage of a situation but does not create it. It will not have any hold if we had not accumulated mistakes over the past couple of decades. According to the words of Arnaud Leguel, a lawmaker from the left-wing opposition party in France, who chaired the National Assembly France's Burkina Faso Friendship Group arrangement, France is now attempting a sea change in its relations with African nations. When Macron brought the Barkhane operations to an end last year, the decision was taken to engage in more substantive and supportive roles in Africa. According to experts, France have to learn to work with African armed forces, not instead of them. said one French official. French government officials with reference to successful joint French and Niger units working together, but those initiatives are still in a relatively nascent stage and not yet widespread. In closing down this episode, the speed with which French forces were expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic left many observers wondering which country will turn in its backs on France next. The anti-French sentiment is everywhere. Wagner is only present in a couple of countries, but the Russian storytelling is everywhere, warned the French government officials at the time. Based on our research, who said that most French officials feared that less a domino effect than an anti-French contagion that will undermine France's influence and economic interest in the region.
And then talk about the U.S. role, the U.S. drone base in Niger, and talk about the significance of uranium in the world that's in Niger.
Well, let's start with the United States of America. The United States of America has been involved in what they call a war on terror, which is, in the words of Jerry McKinnon, a fabrication in West Africa. The people who are called terrorists, in many cases, are people who were supported by France. In the case of the destruction of Libya, the United States and France removed Gaddafi, and now the United States and France are fighting on both sides of the war in Libya. After the destruction of Libya, the Tuareg left Libya and went into Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The French supported groups that are supposed to be terror groups, and then the United States started what they call the Trans-Sahara Counter-Terror Initiative and spent $500 million on that counter-terror initiative. The United States then went into Niger to build a military base and a drone base in Agadez. Now, all of this is very murky because even the Pentagon cannot account for what is happening. The congressional representatives say they do not know what's going on in Niger. When 4 United States Marines were killed at Tongo Tongo in Niger, and if you look at the map to see where Tongo Tongo is, right at the border between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. When these 4 Marines were killed in 2017, up to now, the Pentagon cannot say what happened to these 4 Marines. The ABC documentary, 321T1 Unredacted, talks about the murkiness of the intelligence and the opaque operations of the Pentagon in Niger. The United States needs to remove its military forces from Africa and to support the peace, social justice forces in Africa who are fighting for reconstruction in that part of the world. So the United States itself is a force for destruction against the peoples of Africa at the moment.
Many experts are worried that France is declining in the continent of Africa, but others are pointing out that as a result of France's presence in the continent for decades, France never made any effort to solidify its presence, to make strategic moves, invest in infrastructure, businesses, and deal with better cooperation and relationship to enhance the Francophone Africa and other African countries to match with them in terms of power in regards to relationship. This has left some bitter accents in the mouths of most African experts and African people. That's the reason why Moscow is gradually chasing France out of Africa. We want to thank you for watching The Explorer. Let us know what you think with regards to this geopolitical issue in the region. Is your country affected? Drop us a comment in the comment section. If you are new here, we encourage you to check some of our informative videos on this YouTube channel. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.